Carib tribes were a warlike seafaring indigenous people native to the Lesser Antilles and parts of northern South America. Renowned for their maritime prowess and resistance to European colonization, the Caribs engaged in numerous raids against British, French, and Dutch ships during the 16th and 17th centuries. These raids were part of a broader resistance to European encroachment, and they reflected the Caribs' ability to adapt to changing circumstances while defending their territory and way of life. This video explores the history of Carib maritime raids, their tactics, and specific examples of attacks on European vessels. The Caribs were adept navigators and sailors, utilizing canoes constructed from large hollowed-out logs, often capable of carrying up to 40 warriors. These vessels, propelled by paddles and sails, enabled the Caribs to travel swiftly across the archipelago and launch surprise attacks on European ships and settlements. Their expertise in navigation and maritime strategy made them a formidable force in the southern Caribbean, and their ability to strike swiftly and retreat before retaliation ensured their continued resistance for over 2 centuries. European colonization posed a direct threat to the Caribs' territories, resources, and sovereignty. The arrival of the Spanish, followed by other European powers, disrupted the Caribs' trade networks. Despite these challenges, the Caribs remained a formidable force, leveraging their knowledge of the region's waters and their combat skills to wage guerrilla-style warfare. The Caribs also formed alliances with other indigenous groups to counter the growing European presence, using collective strength to challenge colonial powers in the region. The Caribs' success in raiding European ships was rooted in their mastery of several tactics. Carib warriors used their fast and maneuverable canoes to launch quick strikes on unsuspecting ships. These attacks often took place in shallow or reef-filled waters where larger European ships were at a disadvantage. By striking quickly and retreating into areas difficult for larger ships to navigate, the Caribs were able to inflict damage while minimizing their own losses. The Caribs' intimate knowledge of geography allowed them to lie in wait for ships passing through channels or near islands, ensuring surprise. These ambushes often involved multiple canoes attacking from different angles, overwhelming the ship's defenses. Under the cover of darkness, the Caribs would stealthily approach anchored ships or coastal settlements, maximizing the element of surprise. Night raids were particularly effective in disrupting the plans of European settlers and sailors, as they created fear and uncertainty. The Caribs lured European ships into dangerous areas with reefs or sandbars, where the ships could be damaged or immobilized, making them easy targets. These natural obstacles served as an extension of the Caribs' tactical ingenuity. Through their raids, the Caribs acquired European swords, muskets, and other weapons, which they incorporated into their arsenal. Over time, this gave them an edge in combat, allowing them to challenge even well-armed European ships effectively. One notable series of engagements occurred during the Anglo-Dutch Wars from 1652 to 1674, during which British and Dutch forces battled for dominance over Caribbean trade. The Dutch, through their West India Company, sought to establish dominance in islands such as Curacao and St. Eustatius, while the British focused on strengthening their control over Barbados and Jamaica. In 1667, the Battle of Nevis saw British ships defeating a Dutch fleet attempting to reinforce their Caribbean presence. The French and Dutch frequently clashed over control of islands such as St. Martin, St. Barthélemy, and Guadeloupe. The Dutch, known for their trade-centric colonial policies, often came into conflict with the French, who sought to expand their agricultural colonies. In the 1670s, French forces attacked Dutch-controlled St. Eustatius, temporarily capturing it before the Dutch reclaimed the island. The British and French engaged in several naval battles throughout the Caribbean, especially during the 9 Years' War, 1688 to 1697, and the War of the Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714. These conflicts often involved sieges of key colonial ports, such as Bridgetown in Barbados and Fort Royal in Martinique. The naval battles were brutal and often left colonies vulnerable to attacks by the Caribs, who seized the opportunity to raid settlements and ships. The frequent conflicts among European powers provided the Caribs with opportunities to strike weakened or distracted settlements and shipping routes. The chaos of naval battles disrupted supply chains, making European ships more vulnerable to Carib raids. The Caribs' intimate knowledge of the region allowed them to exploit these moments of European disarray, further solidifying their reputation as formidable maritime warriors. In the early 17th century, French settlers began to establish colonies in the Caribbean, including on islands such as Martinique and Guadeloupe. These incursions provoked fierce resistance from the Caribs. One notable incident occurred in 1635, when French colonists attempted to settle on Martinique. The Caribs mounted a series of attacks on French ships supplying the settlers, disrupting their ability to establish a foothold. These raids included the strategic targeting of ships carrying provisions, weapons and reinforcements, forcing the settlers to rely on sporadic and risky supply lines. In one documented instance, a French supply vessel was ambushed off the coast of Guadeloupe. Using their canoes, the Caribs surrounded the ship, boarded it, and overwhelmed the crew, seizing valuable supplies. The stolen goods not only bolstered the Caribs' resources, but also weakened the French colonial effort in the region. The British, like the French, faced persistent resistance from the Caribs during their colonization efforts. One particularly significant raid occurred in 1627, when British settlers arrived on St. Kitts, known then as St. Christopher. The Caribs launched several attacks on British supply ships, cutting off essential provisions and forcing the settlers into a precarious position. These early raids were instrumental in delaying the establishment of a secure British presence on the island. Another example occurred in the waters around Dominica, where Caribs ambushed a British merchant ship laden with goods bound for Barbados. The Caribs used the cover of nearby islands to remain undetected before launching a coordinated attack. The ship was captured, and its crew reportedly killed or taken captive. The audacity and effectiveness of these raids highlighted the Caribs' ability to challenge even heavily armed European ships. The Dutch, who were active in the Caribbean through the Dutch West India Company, also encountered Carib resistance. In 1640, a Dutch ship en route to St. Eustatius was attacked by a group of Carib warriors near the island of Dominica. The Caribs, taking advantage of their smaller, faster vessels, managed to board the ship and loot its cargo of weapons and trade goods. These attacks disrupted Dutch trade routes and forced the Dutch to deploy additional resources to secure their shipping lanes. The papaya, domesticated by Native Americans in Central America, was first encountered by Europeans in the early 16th century. Columbus described the fruit as the fruit of the angels, due to its sweetness. After its initial discovery, Spanish and Portuguese sailors spread the papaya to other parts of the world. By the 16th century, the Portuguese had introduced it to Asia and Africa via trade routes, and the fruit became a valuable trading commodity. Another incident involved Dutch traders attempting to establish a presence in the Lesser Antilles. The Caribs ambushed their ships near St. Vincent, capturing goods and driving the Dutch away from the region temporarily. These raids not only weakened Dutch efforts to establish a foothold, but also demonstrated the Caribs' strategic use of regional geography to their advantage. The 17th century also saw frequent naval conflicts among the European powers in the Caribbean, as they vied for control over lucrative trade routes and colonies. These battles often intersected with Carib resistance, as the indigenous people exploited the chaos to further their own goals. The Carib raids had far-reaching consequences for European colonization and commerce in the Caribbean. By targeting supply ships and merchant vessels, the Caribs disrupted European trade networks and delayed the establishment of colonies. The loss of goods and resources strained the finances of colonial enterprises and forced European powers to invest in more robust naval defenses. The constant threat of Carib attacks created a climate of fear among European sailors and settlers. Ships often required armed escorts, which increased the cost of colonial ventures. Settlers, particularly on isolated islands, lived in constant fear of surprise attacks, which undermined morale and slowed the pace of colonization. In response to Carib raids, European powers launched punitive expeditions aimed at subduing the Caribs. These campaigns were often brutal, involving the destruction of Carib villages and the forced relocation of survivors. Despite these efforts, the Caribs' resilience ensured that resistance continued for decades. Some European powers, recognizing the Caribs' resilience, attempted to negotiate treaties. For example, the French signed agreements with Carib leaders on Guadeloupe and Dominica, granting the Caribs certain territorial rights in exchange for peace. These treaties, however, were often broken as colonial ambitions expanded. Despite their early successes, the Caribs eventually faced insurmountable challenges. The arrival of more heavily armed warships made it increasingly difficult for the Caribs to raid European ships effectively. The technological and numerical superiority of European navies eventually overpowered the Caribs' guerrilla tactics. As European colonization expanded, the Caribs were forced off many of their traditional islands, reducing their access to strategic locations. This loss of territory limited their ability to launch raids and maintain their maritime dominance. Many Caribs were relocated to remote areas or assimilated into colonial societies. On Dominica and St. Vincent, however, pockets of Caribs persisted, maintaining their cultural identity and resisting colonization for longer periods. The Garifuna people of St. Vincent, for example, emerged as a distinct group, blending Carib and African heritage. The Carib raids on British, French and Dutch ships remain a testament to the indigenous people's resilience and determination to defend their lands and way of life. Their maritime skills and guerrilla tactics disrupted European colonization efforts and left a lasting impact on Caribbean history. Today, the descendants of the Caribs, such as the Kalinago of Dominica, continue to honor their heritage, preserving elements of their seafaring and warrior traditions. The Caribs' struggle against European powers highlights the complexity of colonial history, where indigenous resistance played a significant role in shaping the dynamics of power and conflict in the Caribbean. By examining these raids and their impact, we gain a deeper appreciation for the agency and resilience of the Carib people in the face of overwhelming odds. Their legacy endures not only in historical accounts, but also in the cultural and political identity of their descendants, who continue to celebrate their rich history and enduring spirit.